David Sutter back with you, 8:40. It is a Wednesday, July 25th, and kind enough to stop by for the second time in his campaign as U.S. Senate candidate Gary Trauner. You have the luxury of not having to worry about the primary too much. Is that a luxury, I guess, from your standpoint here?
David, I think it's actually a pretty nice thing. Let's admit it, right? It's nice not have to worry that I'm going to get through to the general. You know, I can just go out and be who I am, which I do anyway, but it makes it a little bit easier for me not to worry too much about having an opponent.
I know that I talked to you early in the campaign trail back in kind of mid to late February. We talked about kind of why you were running again, what exactly you were doing. How have things gone? How would you describe the last, say, 4 or 5 months here?
You know, in some ways they've gone really well, and in some ways it's I don't know how to say this. It's unfortunate that they've gone really well. I'll tell you why. Because I think people are fed up. They're really fed up with what's going on in Washington, D.C. They know it's dysfunctional, and that's too bad. It shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't have to be going well for me because people are so fed up with things going in Washington, D.C. But, you know, my hashtag on my yard signs is Country Before Party, and I think a lot of people are realizing that it's time for us to start putting country first, not party first, and that D.C. isn't doing that, both sides. And that you need some folks up there who are not professional politicians who are willing to try and make a difference and do the right thing.
Obviously, you will wait until the August 21st primary is done to find out who you will run against. You got a few more candidates on the Republican side, so we don't know necessarily who you're going to run against. What would you say right now is the biggest issue that is brought up to you by citizens of this state? You
know, again, there's two things, I think. Okay. One of them is a specific issue and one of them is more general. The specific issue is healthcare. No doubt that people are worried about healthcare. They're worried about the cost of it. We're the most expensive state in the country. You know, people can't get it. They can't afford it. Even if they have healthcare, they're worried about losing their home or losing their job if their kid gets sick. It's something that we really need to focus on. And you know, the truth is, folks in Washington, D.C. right now are trying to destroy the Affordable Care Act. I don't understand why you would want to try and take affordable health insurance away from hardworking, economically challenged people, right. But that's somehow what some people seem to want to do. So that's a specific issue. And then again, the other issue is this sort of dysfunctionality in D.C. in general. People really are fed up.
Yeah. How do, from your perspective, how do we go about, whether it's, you want to say, fixing the Affordable Care Act or just fixing healthcare in general, how do we get back to a system that's competitive and offers some cheaper rates to citizens? Because, let's face it, my rates went up when the ACA came right. into play and have gone back down a little bit since they've kind of done away with it.
Right. Well, I mean, the individual mandate is getting rid of the individual mandate destabilizes the insurance market. Let's understand something. It's a little complex, but I'll try and make it as quick as possible. Everyone agrees, including our federal delegation, that they don't want people to be turned down for pre-existing conditions. But if you don't have to get insurance until you're sick, if they can't turn you down for having a pre-existing condition, only sick people will get insurance. Healthy people don't need it until they get sick. So only bad risk will get insurance, and every insurance company in the country would go out of business. That's why the individual mandate came into play, because you need to spread risk over both healthy and sick people. So unless you have some ability to do that somehow, you can't keep that exclusion for the pre-existing condition. So paying lip service to that is what people want to hear, but the reality is it's a lot tougher to make that actually happen. I think there's a couple of things. We need transparency in costs. We need to know what things actually cost in healthcare. I don't know if you get healthcare through your work or not, but a lot of companies will say, charge you $200 through your paycheck for your premium. And most people don't even realize the company's picking up an additional $1,200 or $1,300 because your real premium cost is $1,500 a month, not right. the $200 that you pay. Right? That's one thing. The other thing is we cost shift, right? So if I can't afford, if I have a hangnail and I can't afford the $20 copay at my urgent care and I wait for 4 weeks for a month, and all of a sudden it becomes sepsis and I go to the emergency room and it's a week-long stay and it's a $100,000 bill, but I can't pay that obviously because I couldn't pay the $20 copay to begin with. Right. The next time you, David, come in for an MRI, instead of that MRI costing $1,000, it's going to cost $1,200. There's a 20% tax on that because you have to make up the cost. Okay. And then the last thing I would say is administrative costs. Our administrative costs are probably 20 to 30% of all medical costs. It doesn't go towards healthcare. It goes towards backroom stuff, trying to shuffle paper. And no other country has it like that, and we need to fix that. If you can work on those three things, transparency, reducing cost shifting, spreading risk, and getting rid of some of the administrative costs, you got a better chance of doing it.
And that brings up an interesting question, because transparency with some of the money that these medical places make. I mean, you just hear about the billions of dollars that they rake in year in and year out. They don't want to give up their records and what it costs and how much they're bringing in.
So I was the COO of our hospital where I live on the west side of the state. I've seen this up close and personal, but you know, it's even worse than that, and this is again one of the things that I'm running on that people are concerned about. I ask a simple question to folks in Wyoming. Who thinks seniors should pay more for their drugs on Medicare? Because Congress passed a law that says Medicare can't negotiate drug prices with big drug companies. I would argue literally not one person in this state thinks that's what should happen, except for our federal delegation, because Big Pharma has them in their pocket. So we need to get rid of big money to make sure that some of those big, wealthy, rich corporations that are making big money on healthcare don't hold sway over our members of Congress and don't dictate laws.
We're visiting with U.S. Senate candidate Gary Trauner in studio with me here on a Wednesday edition, Laramie Live on KOWB. So you talk about healthcare, you know, country before party. How do we go about fixing D.C. in your mind? That's a major challenge, because we hear about that from candidates across the country, yet you get back to D.C. and then something all of a sudden changes in them a little bit. I mean, I've heard that from other people across the country.
Right. That's the biggest question I get. And look, you know, I wish there was a magic bullet, right? I mean, I wish I could just wave my wand, or I could be the one guy that goes up there and it'd be like everybody would listen to me. I know that's not necessarily the case, right? But I think when I talk to people, I let them know I think you need two things. You need to vote for people that have leadership ability and integrity, right? It's really kind of simple. Because if you have leadership ability, you're willing to make tough decisions, and you have the integrity to do what you think you believe instead of what your party tells you, you can start finding other people that have that and work together and get things done. And my view, honestly, is if you find people that have those two traits, I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans or independents or they live on the moon, vote for them, because we don't have enough of those folks in Washington, D.C. right now. But you know, if running the businesses that I've run, or the hospital, or any of the organizations I'm in, it's just people to people. It's relationships. You know, people ask me what's the first thing I would do if I got in office. My gut response was, I'd sit down in my office, look around me, get up, walk out, go across the hall, find the first office of the senator in the other party that's nearest to me, go sit down with them, knock on their door, and say, hey, what's going on? How do we do this?
We're again, Gary Trauner's in studio with me this morning, running for the U.S. Senate seat that is up for election here in 2018. Got to get through the primary, and then you've got a lot of folks on the Republican side, and then Gary's running on the Democratic ticket coming up in the November general election, which will be November 6th. So healthcare is your big one. What else are you hearing about from citizens? I would first kind of ask you, from an economical standpoint, how can our delegation in Washington, D.C. help us from a state perspective with our budget and our economy right now here in the Cowboy States?
You know, that's a great question, and you know, I do hear about the economy obviously a lot. We've been in a bust, we're coming out of it, we're not really fully there. You know, things are a little bit better. I think everyone's hopeful, but you know, unemployment is down. But part of the problem too is that it doesn't do us any good with a growing economy if all the benefits of that economy go to a small slice of people. So wages are actually not up, they're down nationally across the country, right? Okay. People can't afford the higher cost of healthcare and education, et cetera. So we need to find a way to make sure everybody participates in a growing economy. But when it comes to state level stuff, you know, our tax structure is something that the state ledge has to deal with and the governor has to deal with. And that, you know, a study came out not that long ago that said even if we add businesses in Wyoming that are non-extractive industry related, they actually will take money out of the state in coffers instead of putting money in. So because of the services they require versus the taxes they bring in. So that's something that's a state level thing. I think, look, we're an energy state and we probably always will be. That's fine, right? I think the free market is telling us a couple of things. They're sending some hints that while coal, the people that have built coal and run coal and natural gas and oil over the last 100 years, you know, kudos to them for doing what they've done. It's great. We need to help them transition. And it's not going away tomorrow, but diversification is the key. So I think at the national level, helping folks to understand here, we can diversify into other energy sources. They're not mutually exclusive from what we already do. You know, working with carbon fiber, working with carbon nanoparticles that come from coal, carbon capture. Those are things we need to continue to do. But the truth is we can't put our heads in the sand and ignore the fact that the rest of the world is moving in a different direction, and we will fall behind as a country and as a state if we don't try to do that.
So how do we go about, I guess, what would be some steps to keep up with, or maybe get ahead of that curve, or back ahead of that curve in your mind?
Well, I think, if at the federal level, I don't want government overreach, but every single source of energy in this country has had help from the federal government in its early stages.
Right.
And, sources like coal and oil and gas still get help from the federal government in the sense of tax breaks, depreciation schedules that allow them to, depreciate stuff over a certain period of time that really, are federal assistance. It's not viewed that way necessarily, but that's what it is. So I think incentivizing companies, when I'm up in Gillette, I don't want our companies like Arch Coal and Peabody Energy, our single source energy companies, to become like Kodak, right? Kodak, we all bought film from Kodak. Kodak invented the first digital camera, but they missed the digital boat. And they're a shell of what they were because they didn't diversify. They didn't see what was coming. They didn't adjust to the market. I want to help at the federal level to incentivize those companies to adjust to the marketplace.
So if I'm somebody at Arch or Peabody, why not get into the carbon capture business at the same time while you're still mining coal up in the same region?
Right, exactly right.
Okay.
And not only that, but we've got a lot of reclaimed mine land up in Campbell County as an example. I visited a manufacturing company in Sheridan, and they started out in the oil field business, and they manufacture parts for oil field part companies. And when I walked through their plant, they were manufacturing or helping manufacture wind turbine parts, right? And they're like, we need to branch out. We don't want to get caught in the boom bust cycle either. So why don't we take those kind of companies and help them to go up to Campbell County and augment what's already happening there?
Okay. Again, we're visiting with U.S. Senate candidate Gary Trauner, and don't want to run out of time here. I got to keep an eye on my clock here as we get close to the end of the 8 o'clock hour. Let me live on KOWB. Your son's with you on the campaign trail, which brings me to an interesting point about the debt in this country and how it continues to kind of pile up. Some of it eases. I mean, every once in a while you see a little ease, and then it kind of piles back on. And how do we get out of that cycle of continuing to, I guess, dig ourselves further and further into debt at the federal level, especially?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I do want to give a shout out to my son Aaron. He's 18. He just graduated from high school, and he and his brother forced me to run because they're worried about their future because of the debt and other reasons. I did tell him, if you're going to force me to run, you're going to come on the campaign trail with me and see what it's like. So that's why he's here today. But look, first of all, I think anyone loses the ability to call themselves a fiscal conservative if they've been in office for 10 years and our debt's gone from $9 trillion to $21 trillion in that period of time. But look, running a business, there's two ways to do this, maybe three ways. You increase your revenues and you decrease your expenses, or some mix of the two. That's really all you can do, right? Now, if you look at the tax code, since 2001, we have cut taxes on the top 20%. It's cost us about $6 trillion. And right now, the lost revenue from those taxes on the highest earners is about $600 billion plus a year. That's pretty much almost enough to balance the budget right now on a yearly basis. So, you have to look at that and say, are we doing the right thing? I personally think that trickle-down economics is a fraud. It's never worked. It's shown that people, when they get extra money at the highest levels, they just invest it, sock it away, and it actually causes bubbles. So to me, that doesn't work. Now, the expense side is tough. Social Security has not yet contributed to the debt. Everyone thinks that it has, but it's actually helped bring our debt down. It's brought more money in than it's paid out until the next several years. So it's not Social Security. We need to look at being more efficient and budgeting better, not necessarily budgeting bigger. So it's everything from military to discretionary to whatever you call it. But really, you need to match your revenues with your expenses. The last part of it is growing the economy so that you do have more tax revenue. But if you grow the economy and the tax revenue for the highest 1% or top 10%, if they're paying less, it's not going to work.
Again, Senate candidate Gary Trauner in studio with me this morning. Lastly, before I let you go, so you're waiting to find out who you're going to run against here. So what, obviously, you're out on the campaign trail, going out, meeting the folks. When do you really start to gear up as to go toe to toe against whomever wins that Republican nomination coming up on August 21st.
Well, you know, as a sports guy, David, first of all, that you can't control what you can't control. I heard that coach talking about the junior baseball, and he's like, we don't know anything about the teams we're playing. We're just going to take care of our business. So, you know, it's very similar. I'm going to take care of my business. I'm going to let people know who I am. I'm out there with a positive message. I think it's really important for people to know what I am for, not just what I'm against. And that's not going to change all that much. I do think elections are job performance reviews for incumbents, and they're job interviews for challengers. And so in a job performance review, constructive criticism is a totally valid thing. So I think the ability to constructively criticize people that have been in office and find out why they've been voting for the things they do or why they do the things they do is valid. But I'd really rather focus on what I think I can bring to the table. I think people want that. I think they want someone who's positive and is more about what they're about as opposed to fighting everybody else. That's why we've gotten in this position we're in D.C. with both parties at each other's necks and not doing what's right for people. So.
Well, they don't seem to want to get things done. Well, let's just put it that way. So, Gary, thanks so much. I got to run. I'm up against it here at the end of the hour, but pleasure to have you back in, and I'm sure we'll see you back here yet
Always
again.
Love coming in, David. You know, whenever you ask me, I'm happy to talk to the folks here in Laramie and across the state. And good luck going forward for the summer.